The frozen expanse of Talgor was a silence unlike any other, an unbroken, bitter stillness where the wind howled like a lost soul across a white, desolate world. It was a place where no human had ever truly set foot, a forgotten moon on the outermost edge of the galaxy, forsaken by time and history. Until now, Dr. Maya Calloway had waited her entire life for a moment like this. An astrobiologist with a passion for the unknown, she had dedicated herself to unraveling the mysteries of life beyond Earth. This was her dream, a world untouched by human hands, ripe with secrets hidden beneath miles of ice. What lay beneath? The frozen surface of Talgor she could only imagine. As the team descended into the depths of the moon's icy crust, the sense of wonder was palpable, infectious. Their research vessel, Calypso, a marvel of technology and human engineering, floated above the icy surface, casting a pale shadow across the fractured landscape. Through the reinforced hull of their submersible, Maya could see the faint outlines of something large, something ancient, buried deep beneath the ice, a city. No, not just a city, an entire civilization long forgotten by the galaxy. But as they began their descent into the chasm where the city lay, something began to stir in the cold, dark depths of Talgor. At first, it was only a whisper, soft, almost imperceptible, carried by the cracking of the ice. But as they got closer, that whisper grew louder, more distinct. It was not the wind. It was something else, something waiting. They were not the first to uncover this secret. Dr. Maya Calloway was an academic at heart, and in her mind, the discovery of the ancient city beneath Talgor was nothing short of a revolutionary moment in the history of humankind. Her heart raced as the submersible Argus plunged deeper into the jagged crevices of the frozen moon. The ice shimmered outside the hull, an unyielding barrier to the mysteries that lay below. She leaned over the observation console, her breath fogging up the glass, trying to make sense of the shapes forming in the distance. "Is that a building?" her colleague, Dr. Liam Reyes, asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. His eyes wide and bright behind his glasses followed Maya's gaze as they passed over the structures, slowly becoming more defined. Maya nodded, her voice low, almost reverent. "It's a city, or what's left of one. This changes everything." The team aboard the Argus was a small group of 5, all handpicked by Maya herself. Each member of the crew brought a unique skill set to the mission, but Maya was the one who understood the gravity of the situation. She had spent years studying the ancient myths and possible extraterrestrial civilizations, but to discover a city buried beneath miles of ice was beyond anything she had ever imagined. The submersible's thrusters hummed softly as it glided. Deeper into the heart of the city, the walls of the ice cavern stretching out on either side like towering monoliths. Through the dim glow of the submersible's lights, Maya could see the ancient architecture coming into sharper focus. Massive stone structures, adorned with intricate carvings, loomed ahead. They looked wrong. The proportions were off, the angles too sharp. Nothing about the city matched any known architecture. It was unlike anything they had encountered before, a stark reminder that this was no human creation. "Look at the carvings," Dr. Jenna Harlow, an archaeologist, said, leaning over the side. She pointed to the walls where faint symbols were etched into the ice, illuminated by the dim lights. "These aren't any language I've ever seen. They're alien." Maya's pulse quickened. "Keep scanning for any signs of life. We need to be careful. We don't know what we're dealing with yet." The Argus descended lower, drawing closer to the city's central structure. Maya's instincts told her something was wrong, but she couldn't place why. A sense of unease crept up her spine, but she shook it off. This was history in the making. They were about to uncover answers to questions that had plagued humanity for centuries. There was no room for fear. As the submersible neared the center of the city, Maya's breath caught in her throat. A colossal structure stood before them, an enormous pyramid-like building that seemed to pierce the very core of the moon. Its surface shimmered, reflecting the dim light of the submersible in a way that was almost unnatural. But there was something even more disturbing about it. It was covered in intricate, unidentifiable symbols that seemed to pulse in and out of view, almost as if alive. "Prepare the extraction team," Maya ordered, trying to keep the tremor from her voice. "We need to get inside. There's something down there. I can feel it." The Argus hovered near the entrance, and the crew began their preparations. Maya led the way, her heart racing as she donned her heavy environmental suit. The others followed, each one more than eager to step onto the surface of this alien city. As they approached the entrance of the pyramid, Maya's thoughts raced. What could this civilization have been like? What had happened to them? Dr. Reyes, always the skeptic, was the last to step off the submersible, his eyes scanning the area, warily. "You know, Maya, I've got a bad feeling about this." Maya smiled tightly, trying to mask her own unease. "We didn't come all this way to turn back now, Liam. As they crossed the threshold into the pyramid, the air shifted. A faint, cold breeze seemed to brush against them, though no wind could be heard. It felt as though something was watching them, waiting. The walls were adorned with strange murals, depicting creatures unlike anything the crew had ever seen. Their elongated bodies and grotesque features were beyond the reach of human comprehension. The further they went into the pyramid, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The shadows in the corners seemed to lengthen, stretching out like hands reaching for them. Maya's pulse quickened again, but she kept her eyes on the prize: discovery, knowledge, the answers to questions that had plagued humanity for centuries. "Keep your lights up and stay close," Maya ordered. Her voice, though firm, carried an edge of anxiety she hadn't intended. She could feel it now, the presence. The city wasn't abandoned, not completely. A sudden sound echoed in the distance. A low, rasping noise. It was as if something was moving beneath the ice, something alive. The crew froze, listening. The sound came again. This time, it was closer. "What the hell was that?" Liam whispered. "I don't know," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But we need to find out." Suddenly, a shadow flitted across the wall, just out of the corner of her eye. Maya's heart skipped a beat. She turned quickly, but the shadow was gone, as if it had never been there. "Stay alert," she ordered. "We're not alone." The deeper the team ventured into the ancient city, the more oppressive the silence grew. Their footsteps echoed off the walls of the enormous hall, each sound feeling louder than the last. It was as though the very stone of the pyramid was absorbing them, wrapping the team in a hushed, unnatural stillness that made every movement feel like a betrayal. Maya could sense the unease settling in among her crew, though none of them dared speak of it aloud. Each glance exchanged, every subtle shift in posture, betrayed their mounting discomfort. The cold, ever-present chill in the air seemed to creep deeper into their bones with every step they took. "I don't like this place," Dr. Jenna Harlow murmured, her voice barely audible as she adjusted the light on her helmet. "I feel like we're being watched." Maya glanced back at Jenna, noticing the unease in her eyes. The archaeologist was always the most open about her skepticism, but Maya had been too focused on the mission to notice the subtle signs of fear in her colleagues. Now that Jenna had voiced it, Maya couldn't ignore the gnawing sense of something not quite right. They had only just entered the structure, and already the air was thick with foreboding. "Stay close," Maya said, her voice tight, though she didn't let herself show any signs of doubt. "There's something here, something important. They passed deeper into the pyramid's vast chambers, their light cutting through the shadows. The walls around them were adorned with murals and carvings, each more disturbing than the last. At first, Maya had believed them to be simple depictions of the city's inhabitants. Perhaps they were the builders, or the ones who once lived here. But as they moved further, she began to realize these images were far from innocent. There were creatures, grotesque in form, with too many limbs, elongated features, and eyes that seemed to stare directly into her soul. The shapes were alien, their proportions bizarre, as if drawn by a being who had no concept of human anatomy. They were more than mere paintings. These images seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, their features shifting ever so slightly. When Maya's gaze faltered, "What in God's name are these?" Liam's voice broke through the silence, thick with disbelief, as he pointed at a particularly disturbing mural. A creature, humanoid in shape, but with limbs that twisted unnaturally, was shown surrounded by a swirling vortex of dark energy. Its eyes glowed with a menacing intensity, as though it were alive, watching them. "They're not just carvings," Maya whispered, her voice tight with a mixture of awe and dread. "These creatures, they're part of the story this city is telling. But they don't look like anything we've ever seen before. They're not human." "No kidding," Liam muttered, taking a cautious step back from the wall. "But what does it all mean?" Maya stood frozen, her mind racing. She reached out to touch the wall, her gloved hand brushing lightly against the cold stone. For a brief moment, the sensation of something, almost like a pulse, throbbed beneath her fingertips. She pulled her hand back sharply, her heart racing. It was as if the stone itself had reacted to her touch. But she couldn't explain it. There was no logical reason for it, not in any way she could understand. "What the hell was that?" Jenna asked, voice cracking with fear. Her wide eyes darted nervously around the chamber. "I don't know," Maya replied, her thoughts spinning. She had to stay focused. This was the discovery of a lifetime. They couldn't let their fear get the better of them now. The group pressed forward, deeper into the heart of the pyramid, each step echoing in the growing silence. Their path twisted and turned, leading them into labyrinthine corridors that seemed to go on forever, each one colder and more foreboding than the last. There was no sign of any living creature, yet every so often Maya could swear she saw something move just out of the corner of her eye. Shadows that seemed too dark, too alive for any natural explanation. Finally, they reached what appeared to be the central chamber of the pyramid. It was vast, the ceiling stretching far above them, lost in the dark, and the walls were lined with strange crystalline structures that gave off a faint eerie glow. The floor was covered in what looked like a large, circular pattern of symbols. The symbols themselves were unlike anything Maya had ever seen, a combination of shapes and lines that defied any logical meaning. "Is this a map?" Liam asked, crouching down to examine the symbols closer. "It could be," Maya said, kneeling beside him, "but the layout, it's not like anything we know. This city doesn't follow any patterns we understand." Her voice trailed off as her eyes fell on a raised platform at the center of the room. It was large, constructed of the same stone as the walls, but it was the object resting atop it that caught her attention. It was a pod, oval-shaped and black, almost obsidian in appearance, and it was radiating an unsettling aura. There were faint markings etched into its surface, though they were far more complex and intricate than the ones they had seen on the walls. "Is that what I think it is?" Jenna asked, stepping back as she pointed toward the pod. Maya's heart skipped a beat as she stepped forward, her hand reaching out toward it instinctively. "I think it's some kind of containment vessel," she murmured. "It looks like it was meant to hold something dangerous." Liam's voice cut through the growing tension. "Dangerous. Maya, you're not seriously considering opening that thing, are you?" Maya paused, considering his words. She had always prided herself on making rational decisions, but there was something in the back of her mind telling her this was the moment. This was the reason they were here. If there was one thing Maya had learned throughout her career, it was that great discoveries didn't come without risk. She looked at her team, their faces a mixture of uncertainty and fear. Jenna was already backing away from the platform, a nervous look in her eyes. Liam's jaw was set tight, his posture defensive. Only Dr. Reyes remained silent, his eyes locked on the pod, unreadable. "We're here to understand," Maya said softly. "We came for knowledge, and this could be the key." The team exchanged glances, but no one spoke. The air was thick with unspoken doubts, each of them silently wrestling with the same question: should they really go any further? Before Maya could say another word, there was a sudden, sharp crack, like the sound of ice splitting, reverberating through the chamber. The walls around them seemed to tremble, and the temperature in the room dropped sharply, as if the air itself had thickened with dread. The sound came again, this time louder, more ominous. Something was shifting deep beneath them. Something ancient, something waiting. Maya's breath caught in her throat as a cold, creeping realization settled over her. They had awoken something. "Get back to the sub!" Liam shouted, panic creeping into his voice. "Now!" But it was too late. The walls of the chamber seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, and the shadows at the edges of the room began to lengthen, twisting and writhing, as if alive. Maya turned to her team, her voice trembling with urgency. "We need to leave, now!" But as they turned to flee, the ground beneath their feet gave way with a deafening roar. The floor cracked open, and the team was plunged into darkness. The crash was a blur of ice and darkness. One moment, the floor beneath their feet had been solid, and the next, the world had shattered. Maya had no memory of how she'd fallen, only the sickening feeling of her stomach lurching as the ground gave way. The submersible, Argus, was no longer an option. They were cut off, deep within the heart of the city, surrounded by nothing but endless corridors and the creeping shadow of something ancient. When Maya regained her bearings, she found herself on her hands and knees in a pitch-black passageway, the air thick with the scent of cold stone and something far more unsettling. Decay, or perhaps something older, something that hadn't seen the light of day in millennia. She could barely hear the others through the ringing in her ears, but their voices soon became clearer. "Maya? Maya, are you okay?" Liam's voice. "I'm fine," Maya answered, her voice rough. She stood up, her legs unsteady beneath her, and fumbled for her flashlight. The light flickered before she managed to get it working, casting an eerie glow on the walls around her. She turned her head toward the others, spotting Jenna and Reyes nearby, both of them struggling to regain their composure. But there was no sign of Dr. Reyes. "Where's Liam?" Jenna asked, her eyes wide with panic. "He was just behind us, wasn't he?" Maya said, scanning the dark passageway. The darkness seemed to stretch on forever, the narrow corridor swallowing the weak beam of her flashlight. Jenna began, but she stopped herself, taking a cautious step back. "Maya, I don't like this. This place, it's not right." Maya swallowed hard. She couldn't deny the truth in Jenna's words. The deeper they ventured into this place, the more it felt as though they were intruding on something that didn't belong to them. Something that didn't want them here. "I'll go check the hallway," Maya said, her voice steady, though the unease in her chest was growing by the second. She had to keep them focused. "Stay here." She made her way down the corridor, her heart pounding in her chest. The walls were smooth but uneven, as though they had been shaped by forces beyond human understanding. The temperature had dropped dramatically since the fall. It was colder now than before. Her breath formed in the air, in front of her, dissipating in the thick, stagnant atmosphere. It felt wrong. Maya moved quickly, her flashlight casting brief, fleeting glimpses of the symbols that now adorned the walls. She'd seen them before, but now they looked different. more sinister. Their shapes seemed to shift when she wasn't, looking directly at them, like they were alive, responding to her presence. The beam of her flashlight landed on something ahead. A faint outline, a door. She approached cautiously, her pulse quickening. The doorway was nothing like the smooth, symmetric entries they had seen earlier in the city. This one was jagged, uneven, the stone warped and cracked. The symbols were etched deep into the surface, glowing faintly, pulsing with an eerie rhythm. Maya's instinct screamed at her to turn back, to regroup with the others, but something in her, compelled her forward. With a steadying breath, she pushed open the door, revealing a vast circular chamber. The floor was covered in strange metallic debris, remnants of some long-dead technology that Maya didn't recognize. At the center of the room stood a massive stone altar, at least 20 feet high, inscribed with more of the alien symbols. It looked ancient, too ancient, and yet it seemed to hum with a quiet, dangerous energy. The walls of the chamber were covered in the same murals as before, but these were different. They were not just images, they were scenes, a story unfolding before her eyes. At first, the scene seemed innocuous enough, a race of beings, humanoid but not human, living in harmony with their surroundings, building great cities and achieving technological marvels. But as Maya's eyes moved across the murals, the story began to take a darker turn. The beings in the images started to change, their faces becoming more monstrous, their features distorted, their bodies elongated, their limbs twisted, their eyes hollowed out in terror. Then the most chilling part, the creatures were shown imprisoning something vast, something terrible. Maya's breath caught in her throat as she saw it. The creature. It was immense, coiled around the altar, its form dark and undefined, a shape made of shadows and terror. It was a being of pure malice, its eyes glowing with an unholy light. The murals depicted the beings, these ancient aliens, binding the creature, holding it down with chains made of light. But the creature's eyes, its eyes seemed to follow her, glowing from within the mural, as though it could sense her presence. Her stomach churned. The symbols surrounding the creature seemed to pulse in time with the ominous hum in the room. Maya stepped back, feeling a cold sweat form on the back of her neck. "God," Maya whispered, horrified by what she had uncovered. "This isn't just a city, it's a prison." She turned only to realize that she was no longer alone. Jenna had followed her into the room, her wide eyes darting nervously around the chamber. Her face was pale, her lips trembling. "Maya, we need to get out of here. This place, it's not just dangerous, it's..." Jenna started, but then her words faltered. Maya's eyes locked onto Jenna's, and she followed her gaze to the far side of the room. There in the shadows, something shifted. Something that shouldn't be able to move. A low, raspy sound filled the air, like breathing. Slow, deliberate, as though the creature had been waiting for them all this time. And then the whispers began. "Did you hear that?" Jenna gasped, her voice strained with fear. The whispers came from all directions now, like voices in a distant dream, murmuring in an alien tongue. They seemed to vibrate the very air around them. Before Maya could respond, a loud thud echoed from behind them. She whipped around, her heart leaping into her throat. Liam appeared in the doorway, looking disoriented and breathless. His eyes were wide, pupils dilated. He was shaking, but not from the cold. There was something else. "Liam, where..." Maya began, but before she could finish her sentence, Liam collapsed to his knees. His hand reached out, fingers twitching. "Maya, it's here," he rasped, his voice low and hoarse. "It's coming." A screeching sound echoed from within the walls. The room seemed to tremble with the force of it, the shadows around them warping and twisting in unnatural shapes. The temperature plummeted, and Maya could see her breath in the air. The creature was awakening. Suddenly, the altar in the center of the room cracked open. A deep, resonant thrum filled the chamber, vibrating the stone beneath their feet. A cold, dark mist began to pour out from the altar, coiling around them, swallowing the light. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they became a cacophony in Maya's ears. She clutched her head, her mind racing as the voices seemed to call to her, beckoning her closer to the altar. The walls around them seemed to pulse with the same eerie rhythm, and the symbols on the altar began to glow, brighter and brighter, until they were blinding. Jenna screamed, backing away, but Maya could barely hear her over the deafening hum that filled the chamber. The mist thickened, swirling around their ankles, creeping up their bodies, pulling at them like 1,000 cold fingers. The creature was free. The air was suffocating, thick with the oppressive weight of the unseen force pressing in from all sides. Maya's breath came in short, shallow gasps as she tried to make sense of what was happening around her. The swirling mist had risen up from the altar, engulfing them in a cold, creeping darkness. It felt like it was alive, as though the very room was breathing, exhaling its poisoned air into their lungs. Maya glanced around at her team. Liam was still on his knees, his eyes wide, unfocused, as if trapped in some nightmare only he could see. Jenna stood frozen near the door, her back pressed against the stone, her face pale and streaked with sweat. Reyes was trembling, his hand gripping the edge of the altar as if holding on to reality itself. The whispers had grown louder, closer, becoming a chorus of voices, each one indistinguishable from the last, yet all calling out with a single, unified purpose. They were calling to her, to all of them, filling their minds with fear, doubt, and confusion. And then the shadows shifted. They coiled around Maya's legs like tendrils of smoke, wrapping tighter and tighter with each passing second. Her heart pounded in her chest. But it wasn't the fear of being physically trapped that terrified her. No, this was something far worse, something much more dangerous. The whispers weren't just in the room. They were in her head. Maya. Maya? Her name echoed in her mind, soft at first, then louder, more insistent. She clutched her head, feeling a sharp, searing pain at her temples, as though something was trying to tear through the very fabric of her thoughts. Maya, the voice came again, this time from a place she could not pinpoint. It was her own voice, but it wasn't. "Get out of my head," she screamed, her voice breaking. But the voice didn't stop. It continued, weaving through the fabric of her mind, filling the spaces between her thoughts with dread and confusion. "Maya, why do you fight it?" The voice was soothing now, gentle like a lullaby that she couldn't escape. "It's not so bad. You can be free. You can be like me." She shook her head violently, trying to block it out, but the words only grew stronger. It was as if her own fears, her own deepest insecurities, were being pulled from her subconscious and magnified 1,000 times. "Why do you want to leave?" the voice whispered. "You know this is where you belong, where you were always meant to be." Maya's knees buckled and she sank to the cold floor. The shadows seemed to pulse with the voice's rhythm, and she could feel them wrapping tighter around her. It was all so real, the whispers, the voices. It was all invading her thoughts, breaking down the walls of her mind. "Maya, come to me!" She staggered to her feet, her pulse hammering in her chest. She had to fight. She had to fight this. The creature had no power over her. It couldn't. But it wasn't just the creature anymore. It was everything, the city, the ice, the darkness. The entire world was against her, pushing her deeper into the abyss of her own mind. A low cry broke through her thoughts, sharp and panicked. She turned toward the sound, and her eyes found Jenna, her body stiff, her eyes wide with terror. The younger woman was staring into the shadows, her lips moving, though no sound escaped her. "Maya, help me!" Jenna's voice was raw, pleading. I can't. Suddenly, Jenna jerked, her body stiffening as though she were caught in some invisible grip. She gasped, eyes wide with shock and pain, before her head tilted unnaturally back. Her mouth opened, but there was no scream, only a sickening guttural growl, a sound that did not belong to a human. Maya's heart froze. What was happening to her? What was this thing doing to them? "Jenna," Maya shouted, but the words felt distant, as if coming from another world entirely. "Jenna, fight it. You have to fight it." The shadows in the room shifted again, and, for the briefest moment, Maya saw something in them, something more than just darkness. They were moving, stretching, taking shape. The walls were closing in, the shadows growing longer, their forms stretching out from every direction, twisting and writhing like something alive. And then she saw it, the creature, the thing they had awakened. Its form was not just a physical presence. It was an overwhelming, suffocating force that filled the very air around them. Its shape was obscured, a shifting mass of darkness and light, but its eyes gleamed with a terrible intelligence, the eyes of something ancient, something beyond their understanding. It was not bound by physical form, not in the way Maya had expected. No, this was something far worse. It existed within the space between thoughts, between actions, in the very fabric of fear itself. Maya's breath caught in her throat. It's inside us. Jenna's body twitched violently, her legs collapsing beneath her as she fell to the floor. Her eyes locked onto Maya's, and for the first time since the madness had begun, Maya saw something human, still there. "Help me," Jenna whispered hoarsely, her voice barely audible. But it wasn't Jenna's voice anymore. It was the creature's. "Join me, Maya," the voice said, this time not in her head but in the air itself. "You will be mine, like all the others. You have no choice." Maya's heart thundered in her chest as she stumbled back, her mind reeling with the implications. The creature was toying with them, manipulating them, feeding off their fear. It didn't just want to escape. It wanted to make them part of it, bend their minds to its will, corrupt them, break them down into something less than human. And there was no escape. "Maya," a voice said behind her. She spun around, disoriented. It was Reyes, his face gaunt, eyes hollow with terror. He stood in the doorway, his breath coming in shallow gasps, his hands pressed against his temples, as though he were trying to stop the pain in his head. I can't control it," Reyes mumbled, his voice low, trembling. It's in me. It's in all of us." The ground beneath them shifted again, as if the very city was alive, moving, changing. The walls seemed to warp, the shadows, reaching out, pulling them in. Maya could feel it too now. The pull, the grip on her mind, dragging her into the abyss of fear and madness. The creature had planted itself in her thoughts, infecting them one by one, but this wasn't just physical. It was psychological. It was a prison of the mind, a labyrinth of their deepest insecurities and fears, weaving itself into their thoughts, twisting their perceptions. The creature was in them, feeding off their panic, their dread. Maya's pulse quickened as she tried. To force her thoughts back into order, she had to think, she had to hold on. "Reyes," she whispered, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her throat. "We have to break free. We have to break its hold." But Reyes was already gone. His body crumpled to the floor, his eyes vacant. His mind had shattered under the weight of the creature's influence. The creature was winning. "Maya, please," Jenna whispered, her voice breaking. The shadowy tendrils coiled tighter around her, dragging her down, pulling her deeper into the darkness. And then everything went still. The creature's presence receded, leaving behind only silence. Maya stood alone in the room, the walls around her warping, the shadows fading, the whispers no longer clawing at her mind. For a fleeting moment she thought she might be free, but then she realized the truth. The creature wasn't gone, it had already won. Maya stood motionless, her breath slow and shallow. The silence in the chamber felt wrong. It was too quiet, too still. The shadows that had once moved with such malevolent purpose were now hanging, stagnant, as though suspended in time. The oppressive darkness pressed in from all sides, a physical weight on her chest. Her mind, she could hear her heart beating in her ears, each thud a reminder that she was still alive, still trapped. Jenna's body lay on the floor, her face pale, her eyes wide with terror. Her limbs were twitching slightly, but there was no sign of life, no sign of the person she had once been. Maya's stomach churned, and she staggered backward, her mind struggling to grasp the situation. What had happened to them? How had they fallen so far? Her hands trembled at her sides, and her eyes darted to the others. Liam, who had been eerily still ever since he collapsed on the floor, his hands clasped tightly over his head. Reyes, whose form was slumped against the wall, his breathing shallow and ragged. Maya could see the empty, hollow look in their eyes, like they were no longer present, their minds lost to the creature's influence. The creature. Maya's eyes locked onto the altar in the center of the room, the dark mist still pouring from its depths. It loomed over them, a silent, oppressive presence, its form too alien, too vast to comprehend. She knew that it wasn't just feeding on their fear. It was using them, shaping their minds, warping their perceptions into something unrecognizable. Maya forced herself to look away from the altar. She couldn't let herself be drawn in by its power. She needed to think, to act. The creature had taken control of the others, but not her, not yet. She had to keep fighting. There had to be a way to escape. Her mind raced, her thoughts a blur. She couldn't leave the others behind, not when they were still breathing. But what if there was nothing left of them? What if the creature had already consumed them, turning them into something else entirely? Maya! Liam's voice broke through the silence, rasping and hoarse. He was looking at her, his eyes wide but unfocused, as though he could see her, but wasn't truly there. Maya, he repeated, his voice trembling. Help me, it's inside me, inside us all. She felt the weight of his words settle on her chest, crushing her. She could see the terror in his eyes, the broken look on his face, and for a brief moment her resolve faltered. What if he was right? What if the creature had already taken them? What if it was too late? Liam's body twitched again, and suddenly he was up, lurching toward her with a speed that made Maya's heart skip a beat. His movements were jerky, unnatural. His eyes were filled with a madness she hadn't seen before. It was the creature. It had taken him. Maya, don't fight it, Liam whispered, his voice twisted, almost pleading. You're one of us now. You know you are. We're all the same. A chill ran down her spine, the words cutting through her like ice. She could see the terror in Liam's face, the struggle within him, but it was as though the creature had submerged his soul beneath layers of fear and darkness. No, Maya whispered, stepping back. No, I won't let it take me. But the more she said it, the more she heard the creature's voice, the deeper it burrowed into her mind. It wasn't just Liam. It was everything, the city, the ice, the walls. They were all connected, part of the same unholy entity. The creature was in every shadow, every breath, every whisper. Her body trembled, and she forced herself to turn away from Liam. She couldn't look at him anymore, not like this. She couldn't let herself be broken. But when she turned, the walls seemed to close in on her. The shadows grew, stretching out to reach her, and then out of the darkness a figure emerged. It was Jenna, or rather, it looked like Jenna. Her body was contorted, her face twisted in agony, her eyes wild with a terror. But there was something else there, a cold, malevolent glint that Maya hadn't seen before. The creature had fully consumed her. Jenna, Maya whispered, her voice breaking, but Jenna didn't respond. Instead, she moved toward her with slow, deliberate steps. Each movement was unnatural, like a puppet controlled by invisible strings. You can't escape, Maya. Jenna's voice echoed in the air, though her lips didn't move. The words came from everywhere and nowhere, filling the space between them. You're already part of it. The figure before her seemed to melt, its form distorting and shifting in ways that defied logic. It was as though the very idea of what it was, who it was in constant flux, shifting from one version to another. "I'm not you," Maya shouted, her hands clenched into fists. She backed away, her feet stumbling over the uneven ground. "I'm not one of you. I won't let you win." Jenna's figure reached out toward her, her hands extended like claws. "It's too late, Maya. You've already lost." Maya screamed as the figure lunged at her, but before she could react, the shadows around her seemed to warp and shift. The ground beneath her feet cracked open, sending her tumbling into a void of blackness. She fell, and as she did, the whispers grew louder, rising to a deafening crescendo. The world around her blurred. She no longer knew which way was up, which way was down. It was all darkness, all cold. Her mind screamed, her thoughts fractured, like shards of glass. As the creature took hold of her once more, Maya opened her eyes with a jolt. The world around her was different now. She was no longer in the chamber, no longer surrounded by the twisted remnants of her team. Instead, she was somewhere else. A vast, empty expanse stretched before her, the ground covered in thick snow. The sky above was a swirling, turbulent mix of dark clouds, glowing faintly with an eerie, otherworldly light. "Maya," a voice whispered in the distance. Her breath caught in her throat. It was Jenna's voice again, but it was soft, distant, as if coming from far away. "Maya, it's time." Maya's heart raced. She spun around, looking for the source of the voice, but all she could see was a landscape that was impossibly bleak, endless snow and ice stretching into infinity. "Maya." The voice came again, closer now. She tried to move, but her legs wouldn't respond. It was as though the snow had become heavy, clinging to her feet, pulling her down. The cold seeped into her bones, freezing her from the inside out. No, this isn't real. This isn't real," she whispered to herself, her hands clutching at the snow, trying to ground herself in reality. But the harder she fought, the deeper she fell into the illusion, and then she saw it, the figure of Jenna. But this time, it wasn't distorted, twisted. It was clear, solid, real. Jenna stood in front of her, smiling, her eyes filled with warmth. But the smile was wrong. It was too warm, too comforting. "Maya," Jenna said, her voice sweet, "we've been waiting for you." And in that moment, Maya knew. This was the creature. It had taken on Jenna's form, her voice, her smile. Everything about it was an illusion, a lie designed to break her. "Maya," the creature whispered again, its voice soft, coaxing. "You can join us. We're all the same. All of us." "No," Maya whispered, her voice barely audible. "I won't be part of you." The world around her seemed to shudder. The illusion cracked, and the landscape began to distort, warping as if the snow itself was dissolving into darkness. And then, from the depths of the void, the creature's true form began to rise, immense, shadowy, unfathomable. "Maya," the voice said, and this time it was more than a whisper, it was a command. Maya's mind was a battlefield. It had been days since they had first breached the city, but it felt like a lifetime. The world around her had become a labyrinth of illusion and horror, with no clear path out. Every time she thought she had found a way to escape, the ground beneath her feet shifted and she was pulled back into the darkness, the creature's whispers guiding her further into its maze. Her body felt as though it were being slowly worn down, her limbs heavy, her mind fogged, as though it had been weeks since she last slept. She was tired, too tired. The exhaustion was something primal, a deep-rooted weariness that threatened to consume her entirely. She had tried everything, running, hiding, fighting, but nothing worked. The creature had already taken hold of the others. Their minds had fractured, twisted into something unrecognizable. Even now, as she moved through the city's abandoned streets, she could still feel their presence in the air. Liam, Reyes, Jenna. They were gone, their bodies mere shells, their souls long consumed, but she hadn't given in yet. As the shadows crept along the walls, Maya's eyes darted over the ruins of the city. The ancient architecture, with its intricate carvings and towering spires, now felt like a mausoleum, cold, sterile, and haunted by something far more ancient than any of them could comprehend. The city, with its frozen ruins and strange geometry, was alive. Every corner seemed to shift when she wasn't looking, the air growing thicker with each passing moment, as though it were trying to draw her in. The walls, the floor, the ceiling, all seemed to bend and warp in ways that defied logic, and the whispers, always the whispers, constant, surrounding her, wrapping around her thoughts like chains. "Don't fight it, Maya," the voice murmured, soft, seductive. "It's only a matter of time before you join us." Maya clenched her fists, her nails digging into the palms of her hands. She couldn't. Let it in. Not now. Not when she was so close to finding an escape. She was running out of options. Out of time. She pressed on, moving through the icy halls of the forgotten city, the flickering lights above casting long shadows that danced along the walls. The floor was slick with the cold, and every step felt as though she were walking on the edge of a precipice. The atmosphere was oppressive, thick with the weight of the creature's presence, and then she saw it. At the far end of the corridor, there was a doorway. A door she had passed countless times before, but this time it was different. There was something about it, an energy, a pull that she couldn't explain. The shadows around the door seemed to twist and writhe as if the room beyond was calling. To her, without thinking, Maya rushed toward it. The whispers intensified as she neared, rising into a deafening chorus. She could hear her name over and over again, a maddening refrain, each utterance more insistent than the last. "Maya, Maya, Maya!" She reached the door, her hand trembling as she grasped the cold handle. For a moment she hesitated, but the need to know, the need to understand what was behind it, overpowered her fear. She yanked the door open. What she saw on the other side nearly drove her mad. The room was vast, larger than any of the others she had explored. It was a cavernous space, its walls adorned with strange alien symbols that seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. At the center of the room was a massive crystalline structure, suspended in mid-air by an unseen force. It shimmered with an otherworldly light, casting a glow that was both beautiful and terrifying. Maya's breath caught in her throat. The crystal seemed to hum with power, its surface shifting as though something were moving inside it. The air in the room was thick with a static charge, and she could feel the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. In front of the crystal stood a figure. It was tall, humanoid, but not quite human. The figure's form was obscured by shadows, its features hidden beneath a cloak of darkness. But even without seeing its face, Maya knew what it was. It was the creature. But this wasn't the same form it had taken before. This wasn't the distorted, shapeless shadow that had haunted their minds. This was something else, something more real, more tangible, and as Maya stared, a horrible realization began to settle over her. The creature wasn't just a being of darkness. It was a consciousness, a parasite, feeding off the fear and confusion of those it encountered. And it wasn't confined to just one body. It had been here for millennia, feeding on the inhabitants of the city, manipulating their minds, and weaving its influence through the very fabric of reality itself. And now, it was using her. It was... "Maya," the voice whispered again, this time from within her own mind. "You've been so strong, so brave. But even you cannot fight this." The crystal before her pulsed, and suddenly Maya could see the faces of her fallen crew members, Liam, Reyes, Jenna, floating within the crystal's depths. Their eyes were wide with terror, their mouths open in silent screams. They were trapped, their souls imprisoned within the crystal, bound by the creature's will. The realization hit Maya like a physical blow. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for her very soul. The creature was feeding on the memories, the essence of her crew, trapping them in this crystal prison, and soon she would be next. "No," she whispered, taking a step back, her mind reeling. "I won't let you have me. I won't." But the creature's presence only grew stronger, its voice echoing in her mind. It wasn't just trying to break her, it was trying to consume her. "You already belong to me, Maya," it said softly. "All that you are, all that you fear is mine." She turned, her heart pounding in her chest, and ran. The door slammed shut behind her with an unnatural force, sealing her in the dark corridor once more. She stumbled forward, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The whispers were deafening now, filling her head with images of her fallen crew. Twisted, broken versions of them. "Please," Maya cried out, her voice desperate. "Please, help me." But there was no answer. The creature's presence surrounded her, suffocating her, pushing her toward the breaking point. She had to escape. She had to get out of this place, but every path seemed to lead her back to the crystal, back to the creature. Suddenly, she stopped. A flash of memory, a fleeting thought. The escape shuttle. In that moment of clarity, Maya knew what she had to do. The creature might have consumed her crew, might have bent their minds to its will, but she still had one thing it couldn't take, her determination. She turned and ran, pushing herself harder than she ever had before. The walls of the city seemed to shift with every step, twisting and changing as though trying to trap her, but she ignored them. Her only focus was the escape shuttle, the only hope of survival. But as she neared the hangar, the ground beneath, her feet trembled, the shadows closed in tighter, the whispers rising to a fever pitch, and then, in the distance, she saw it, the shuttle. But it was not the safe haven she had hoped for. It was surrounded by an army of shadows, figures that seemed to take shape as she approached, rising from the depths of the ice, their eyes glowing with the same malevolent light as the creature. Maya's pulse raced. She was so close, but the creature wasn't going to let her go that easily. She had to make a choice. Maya's pulse hammered in her ears as she bolted toward the shuttle, her every muscle screaming in protest. The darkness pressed in, an inescapable weight, and the shadows continued to close in on her like hands reaching from the void. The creatures, figures she recognized, twisted versions of her lost crew, stood at the edges of her vision, whispering her name, urging her to join them. But Maya kept running. Every step felt like it might be her last. The ground beneath her, feet shifting, the world warping. It wasn't just her mind playing tricks anymore. The creature, that ancient parasite, was using the city, using the very fabric of reality itself to bend and break. She could see it now. The city wasn't just alive. It was aware, conscious in a way that defied explanation. It was as though the entire place was an extension of the creature, its prison, its feeding ground, and Maya was trapped in its maw. She reached the shuttle. The door, once sealed tight, was now open, just a crack, but it was enough. She could escape. She could make it out, leave this hell behind. But the moment she stepped toward the vessel, the shadows twisted and writhed. The figures moved closer, their forms stretching and shifting, distorting like mirages. Maya. She froze, her heart lurching. The voice that spoke her name was different this time. It was not the deep, echoing whisper of the creature. It was familiar. It was human. "Maya, you don't have to do this." It was Jenna's voice, soft and pleading, laced with an emotion Maya hadn't heard since before everything had gone wrong. For a moment, she hesitated. Her gaze flicked to the shadowy figure of Jenna, standing at the edge of the shuttle. her eyes wide with something that almost looked like concern. It was an illusion. Maya knew that. The creature had twisted Jenna's voice and her form, but the familiar pang of loss struck her heart anyway. "No," Maya whispered under her breath. "You're not Jenna. I know what you are. I know what you've become." But the creature's voice, Jenna's voice, only grew louder, more insistent. "I'm still in here, Maya. We all are. You don't have to leave us behind. We're all part of you now. We always have been. Just give in and join us." The air grew colder, the icy tendrils of fear creeping down her spine, but Maya held firm. She had to. She couldn't let the creature take her like it had taken the others. She was not weak. She was not lost. "I won't. I can't," Maya said, her voice growing stronger. She stepped forward, her breath turning to mist in the freezing air. "I won't be part of you. Not ever." The creature's form flickered like static in the air before it erupted into a flash of light and shadow. In an instant, the world seemed to collapse in on itself. The walls of the city shook violently, the ground splitting open beneath Maya's feet, and the shuttle shuddered as though the very universe itself was breaking apart. Maya staggered back, her legs buckling beneath her as she hit the ground hard. She scrambled to get up, her hands scraping against the frozen earth. The air was thick with energy, crackling with the creature's rage, and then, just as quickly as the chaos had erupted, everything fell silent. The shadows dissipated, the whispers ceased, the cold, excruciating, suffocating cold, faded into a sudden warmth that spread through Maya's body. She blinked, her vision clearing. She was still on the surface of Talgor, but everything had changed. The city was gone. The shadows, the creatures, the mind-bending illusions, all of it was gone. She turned, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind her, the shuttle door remained open, a beacon of hope. "Maya, it's not over," the voice came again. This time it wasn't from the shadows. It wasn't the creature speaking through the others. This time it was her own voice, echoing in the quiet. She closed her eyes and shook her head, trying to dispel the thought. She was so tired. She just wanted it to end. She wanted to go home. But then it all clicked. The last piece of the puzzle fell into place. She understood now. The creature had been feeding on fear, yes. But it was more than that. It had been feeding on expectation, on the belief that its power was absolute. It had used the minds of her crew to build an illusion of inevitability, of hopelessness. But that was a lie. The creature didn't control her. She controlled herself. The truth was, the creature had already lost, and the creature, knowing that, had tried one final desperate act to stop her. Maya reached down, her hand trembling as she touched the surface of the shuttle's door. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself a small, triumphant smile. She was free. The air around her stirred as she took the first step into the shuttle, her body still trembling from the ordeal. She was leaving Talgor. She was leaving the abyss behind. But as the door sealed shut, a chilling voice, so soft, so distant, whispered in her ear, "It's not over, Maya. It's only just begun." And that, perhaps, was the most terrifying part. The shuttle's engines roared to life, pulling her away from the frozen moon, from the creature, from the city. But Maya didn't feel the weight of the creature's presence anymore. The whispers were gone. She could breathe, she could think, but in the deepest part of her mind, a new fear began to grow. The voice, the warning, still echoed in her thoughts. It's not over. Talgor was gone, the creature was gone. But something else had woken up, something much older, much more powerful, and wherever she went, it would follow. Maya didn't know what the future held. All she knew was that, for the first time in a long while, she was still alive, and she would fight for that life with every breath she had left.